I've always pronounced that Pwning.
Yeah, I think it's a silent P. Hello and welcome to the Hackaday Podcast. I'm Elliot Williams.
And I'm Jenny List.
This is episode 326, a DIY Pockel cell, funny materials to 3D print with, and owning a Nissan Leaf. That was owning with a P.
Yes.
This week in Hackaday News, hot on the heels of announcing the winners for the 2025 Pet Hacks Challenge, we're starting off with a new one. First, I guess a quick shout out to the top 3 winners for Pet Hacks. You'll all be getting a $150 DigiKey gift certificate. It was a clean sweep for Team Cat. It was Cat at the Door, Cat Bowl Monitor, and Cat Valve were the big winners. And they are basically all about letting cats in, letting cats out, and keeping cats from eating the food they shouldn't do. Go figure.
I just know that a cat that figures out how one of those things works is totally going to abuse it.
Yeah, exactly. Tons of fun entries in that. 3 winners. Hooray. But without further ado, announcing the 2025 Hackaday One Hertz challenge. This is a much more electronic challenge. This is just do anything that does whatever it does once a second, or rather at a frequency of 1 hertz.
Sounds fun.
I love these kind of crazy open-ended ones because it lets people's imaginations run wild. And to encourage running wild, we have a few honorable mention categories. One for how precise you can get your 1 second, 1 hertz frequency down. We're calling this category Time Lords. The category ridiculous is for the craziest way to make a 1 second or /1 hertz something happen once a second. After that, clockwork for random clockwork mechanisms / cool clocks, because everybody likes to build clocks. But this one absolutely has to have a second hand and a second mechanism, because 1 hertz contest. And last up, could have used a 555 because, So if you have a 555 in your project, you can enter it here.
I'm quite looking forward to that one.
This is going to be fun. I love these stupid constraint ones. Like when we do the square inch one, people come up with so many awesome circuit designs that fit in a square inch. And it's just the random constraint that makes people go nuts.
The first square inch contest was just before I started writing for Hackaday, and my entry was in and had to be disqualified during the judging because I started writing for Hackaday. And of course, that's the reason I tell myself why I didn't win.
Exactly. The grapes were probably sour anyway. That's fantastic. Yeah, I've got a few things I could think of to enter into the 1 hertz challenge. I might have to do it. We'll see if I can whip them up in time.
Well, as writers, we're obviously not allowed to make serious entries in the hopes of winning the prize, but there's nothing to stop us putting in an entry because we've made something cool. We know that it's not just going to be considered, that's all.
So that runs until August... He says, checking August 19th at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So you've got 6 weeks. Get on it.
I think that's not 6 weeks. That's an enormous number of seconds.
Exactly. Here we go. 6 weeks. Seconds. Oh my God, it's an enormous number of seconds.
Ooh, cool.
Wow, you have 3,628,800 seconds. Go. 3.6 million seconds. Go. Time's ticking. My God, that's so crazy.
How they rack up.
This is a journey into sound. What's that sound?
What's that sound?
And speaking of contests, we have our every week What's That Sound contest. And this week is a sound reveal week. A bunch of people wrote in. Some people guessed correctly. Well, this was a sound picked by Al Williams. It stumped me, but I got pretty close.
Interesting. That's an interesting sound. My guess is it's some kind of measurement. There's that rhythmic clicking sound in the background, which sounds to me like some kind of sampling. If I had to guess, it would be something like a response from some kind of measurement device that travels through something. I am not in that industry, but if I were lowering a microphone down a drilling shaft or something like that, I'd expect it to make a noise a bit like that. But I'm probably wildly off target, so I'm fascinated to understand what it is.
Oh, that's not bad. It is a sonification of a measurement. This one is NASA's Cassini probe as it went through a plasma wave between Saturn and its moon Enceladus.
Oh,
And
that is so cool.
So those are like plasma shock waves being played off of its plasma detector.
Cool.
Shortly before it dove into Saturn. It's a really great one. I'll throw a link to the Cassini project in here if you didn't know. It did a suicide mission in the end, and because, you know, Saturn's a gas giant, and so it like literally dove into Saturn and gave us as much information as it could on the way in. And this was its last pass around the planet. It was in so close. It was inside the Enceladus moon orbit.
So I couldn't have been physically further away in my guess, but it's still a very, very cool story.
I'll pick this one, not me, by the way. And it's absolutely, absolutely fantastic. It was a great, eerie sound. I said something spacey, but that was as close as I could get on it. I was pretty proud of that in the end. And I think yours is a measuring device. Sounds like a measurement device is not wrong either, technically.
Yeah, but that's scant comfort.
All right. Well, this was a tough one, and out of 17 answers, we had 3 guess it correctly. So,
Well done, readers.
Griggles, Ring Saturn, and Haley all got it right. The best wrong answers include Theremin from Forbidden Planet. Test was not very good. Wind at the Beach, that's not bad.
I consider myself very lucky to have grown up in the glory days of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, which many of you may be familiar with from the likes of Hitchhiker's Guide or early Doctor Who. And that would have done them proud, that sound.
That's right. So 3 people got it right. 4-sided die comes up. 2. Congratulations to Ring Saturn. We'll be getting in touch with you and see about getting you a Hackaday Podcast t-shirt.
Yeah, very cool.
Everyone else, listen in next week. We will have a brand new sound for you to guess. My first one this week is a hacky hack, and it's a car hack at the same time. This comes from a car security group called PC Automotive, and this is covering a presentation they gave at Black Hat Asia and the video that went along with it. The presentation, the PDF, you can download online. It's absolutely fantastic. You should have a look at that for sure if you are at all interested in security hacking or car hacking. We wrote this one up. The title was Hack Turns Nissan Leaf into Giant RC Car. That's basically true. The team got in through the Bluetooth infotainment console, and how the hack works from a user's standpoint. When you connect your cell phone to the Bluetooth in the infotainment, if they can hijack that, there's an exploit on the custom Bluetooth stack that Leaf used here, and that can let them insert code in, get remote execution on the thing. The head unit, of course, runs embedded Linux, and so they can get a shell on this embedded Linux thing, open a reverse tunnel. The car's connected to the network all the time. So essentially, you've got an adversarially controlled Linux computer running in your car connected to your CAN bus at that point. And that's pretty ugly. The team figures out how to load arbitrary kernel modules on the system, et cetera, all of it remotely over the internet, giving them control of a lot of things. For instance, they can honk the horn, turn the wipers on, raise and lower the windows, move the mirrors, et cetera. Fortunately / unfortunately, they can only do some things from the infotainment system. The way the network works, and there's a brilliant slide at the end of the slide deck here explaining this in one shot. There's an ECU that serves as a gateway separating the infotainment side of the CAN bus from the driving the car side of the CAN bus. These things are blacklist, whitelist CAN IDs by the gateway ECU. But the researchers go and look up what microcontrollers used in this ECU, find an exploit in that. They're able to push a new firmware update to this ECU, which then unblacklists their remote attack. And at that point, they can do essentially everything with the car remotely. It's completely puppeted. It's really super. And the video demonstration is great. It's a little bit of a slow burn. They start off with flashing things on the infotainment console and demonstrating that they can record your audio and things like that, which are more infotainment related. Then they fire the wipers and start washing the front window, and then they're moving the mirrors and opening the windows, and then they turn the steering wheel and hit the brakes, and you're like, oh, yeah, game over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Yeah, and some people, I guess, wrote this in the comments. They're like, why the heck are these systems interconnected at all? And, how is it possible that the infotainment system can get access to the body control unit is the name for the parts of the car that, do things like drive. And the answer is that it does need to cross over sometimes. It's, in principle, run through this gateway that should prevent bad things from happening. But in practice, a dedicated hacker can do basically anything. PC Automotive was definitely dedicated. But they didn't have crazy resources. They did what anyone would do with car hacks, and that is they bought a bunch of parts on eBay and figured out how it all worked. They had the ECUs on the table. They had the infotainment console sitting there on their table, and they could just poke around with them. There were some secret codes involved there that they needed to reverse engineer a little bit. It's actually a really cool talk, really fairly fantastic and broad-ranging piece of work here. But like always, a dedicated team can pretty much always find a way in.
It's not as though CAN bus vulnerabilities are new either. If you've been reading Hackaday for a very long time, you'll have seen quite a few other stories ranging from... I remember I wrote up one where a Ford pickup truck, the whole thing stopped working because some water got into one of the rear light clusters and shorted out the CAN bus.
Right.
And there are tales of fancy cars being stolen by popping off the headlight and getting at the CAN bus, and then you can start it up and unlock it and do whatever you want. It's not as though this is a new vector, and that car manufacturers still aren't taking it seriously is reprehensible, I think.
I don't know how seriously or not seriously they are taking it. I mean, to some extent, a car is a really tough surface to secure, especially once you start attaching it to the internet and making it do things like infotainment systems and making that coexist with the driver stuff. I mean, it's weird that cars have become a rolling network of computers, but they are, and attacking that network is, of course, it's a rich target.
A couple of years ago, I wrote an automotive manifesto for how smart motor vehicles should be designed. In short, put all the smart stuff on, but the bits that actually just make it a car, leave them as alone as you can.
Yeah, I do think that's probably going to be the answer to some of this. But the display system is always going to need to know some status about how the body control unit, how the main car-y stuff in the car is working. And probably vice versa. I mean, if you move the smarts out of the infotainment system and into yet another computer that was doing the higher level driving stuff, like, the automatic backup or the, reversing camera or...
Do cars actually need that kind of stuff?
Right.
It's almost as though those of us who learn... I mean, the trouble is you come out like some dreadful sort of red-faced old person, but it's almost as though sort of 20, 30 years ago, we were missing out by not having a special computer that could park for us.
Right. Yeah, sure. And I would maintain, as it sounds like you would, that you don't need the car to be able to park for you. But then other features like ABS brakes, right? Like anti-lock brakes. It's hard to know where to draw the line, though. Like, I do think ABS is absolutely superb.
Yeah, it's a useful thing to have, yeah.
Did we survive without it? Yeah.
Of course we did, but...
Did we have to know to not slam the brakes? Yeah, we did. But isn't it nice to be able to slam the brakes and let the car worry about the traction? Yes, it is.
An ABS system is, by 2025 standards, a very simple system. It's a sensor. It's usually a disc on the drive shaft with an optical interrupter. In microcontroller terms, it was probably quite something in the 1980s, but nowadays many commodity small microcontrollers could do it. It's
Yeah,
not, it doesn't need to
absolutely.
be some Linux running system that's connected to the internet and what have you.
We have a relatively new car. I mean, we bought it used. It's from the modern era. And the thing I hate the most about it is the infotainment system. Like you turn the car on and it takes 10 seconds to boot up. Meanwhile, I'm just sitting there bored. I'm like, I want to be driving now. Hello. Time to go. It boots up sequentially, and of course they're all Android apps. Basically, the whole thing's it's a Linux Android web browser basically, and so all of the like functions of the car are written by people who write web apps for mobile phones, and
Such
that was
confidence.
almost a curse. That was almost an insult
Yeah.
the way I said it. I hope that came
Yeah.
across. Like some of these things, they work half the time or they work sporadically. And I'm like, this is not what I want from a functional vehicle.
I don't actually own a car at the moment, though I have the use of my housemate's car. But it means that quite often when I go somewhere farther afield, I now end up hiring cars.
Ah, cool.
And it always interests me to delve into the infotainment system and find the surprising amount of data that previous users of the hire car have left on it. Things like their phone details and their playlists and all sorts. Probably the one that was most surprising was when I had to go to the Irish Republic for something a while back. I found that somebody had managed to enable their company's system for the automatic motorway tolls. And I found this
nice.
when I got to the airport and tried to pay the motorway toll, and I had to go to the guy and insist that I should pay my motorway toll because I didn't want to get caught for basically fraud. But this hire car that presumably hired by loads and loads of people is happily paying the motorway tolls on whatever this person.
Fantastic.
Well, for my hack, I have not one, but two hacks, two for the price of one, and they are both mechanical 7-segment displays. It seems to have been a growing phenomenon among Hackaday readers that they're producing these mechanical displays, and I'm amazed by how many different takes on a 7-segment display people are coming up with. These one's made out of Lego and the other is 3D printed, and they both adopt radically different approaches to the problem. Up here has made the Lego one, and it's one of those Lego pieces that's like a big grid of holes, and it has Lego rods which it pushes through the holes, and when they stick out, they make the segments. It's servo-driven, and you can't see that it's a 7-segment display when it's not activated, which I quite like. It just looks like a Lego box with this yellow grid of holes on the front. I rather like that, because usually you can see it's a 7-segment display, even if you can't see the number. And the other one from Sebastian is particularly interesting because it's a different mechanism. We've seen all sorts of flip digit displays where one of the segments will turn through sort of 180 degrees to go from a black to white. But this one is a sort of fold digit. The segment folds in half, a little bit like one of the flip digit clocks of yore, where they were all in a big round and the digits folded out as they went round. I find both of these 7-segment displays to be refreshingly different from what I've seen before, and I know that people will keep coming up with new takes on a 7-segment display. I like this because there's still innovation. It hasn't got stale in the way that, say, Nixie clocks did a few years ago, because everyone is different.
Yeah, right? Like, it's amazing how many people can come up with their own permutations on this. It is absolutely fantastic to see.
Totally here for it.
But yeah, will we ever see the last 7-segment display? I claim no.
I don't think so either. I look forward to what the readers produce.
Oh, look at that. Do we have a 1 Hertz challenge running? Why, yes, we do. Can these be made to display seconds? Oh, yes, they can.
Perhaps in future we should have a 7-segment display competition.
Oh, we should. Yeah. Ooh, we might have to. 7-segment, 16-segment. Okay, that's good. I'm writing that down. My next hack is a video from Need It, Make It. He raises a contentious question here, and I think it's neat to have a discussion about it. The video is saying which is better, doing something with a 3D printer or doing something with the CNC router. So it's like additive versus subtractive shootout. And of course, this is a little bit like saying which is better, a hammer or a screwdriver. Like they're different tools, and if you have different jobs to use, you could do different things with them. But in this particular example, he has a coaster slash die tray that's got some magnets embedded in it, and they're stackable. And you could easily make this using either kind of a flat CNC router or a 3D printer. And he's just saying, I can make this one object with either of these. What are the pros and cons of doing it each way? I thought that was really neat. A couple things came out that were surprising to me. One is that walnut wood is cheaper than PLA when he's breaking, right? When he's breaking down the costs, actually, the CNC routed one ends up being cheaper all the way up until you put human labor into the equation. And once you start pricing out his labor, the 3D printer totally wins. What is it? It's a 6-inch diameter, 10 centimeter diameter coaster, but it ends up using $2 and a bit worth of PLA, and somehow he's able to get nice looking walnut for $1.15 for that size. So kudos for him. A lot of the other things end up being surprisingly cheaper in the wood variety, even if he goes toward fancier woods. And I thought that was kind of fun. It makes the projects look super awesome. What kills him is the human operator time. If you're doing something with a CNC router, you know how this goes. Like if you want to use this bit and then you want to use that bit and then you want to use that bit, if you don't have a tool changer, you have to sit around and watch it do. These coasters need machining on the front side and on the back side. So he has to flip it over, rejig everything, recenter, fire away. Wood comes off, you need to sand it. Like, I guess he was also doing some light cleanup work on the 3D printed ones to make them look better. But wood just needs, sanding and finishing and all of that. It's just significantly more human labor involved in it. But, to my eyes, the wooden ones look so much better, though.
Yes,
like it's totally worth it. So again, it's horses for courses here. It's which is the right tool for the job. I don't think it's possible to actually say this one's better. But it was neat to run through this exercise and say, if you have a model like this that both of these can make, which way was the easier workflow? Because it kind of illuminates both of them. I use both for different projects, and in my experience, like the CAM workflow for running the CNC router is just so much more complicated, difficult, intricate, awkward, just so much more involved than it is for 3D printing, which at this point is just, loaded up in the slicer with all the profiles that I have saved that I know work, hit slice, hit submit, done, right? And it's printing in 15 seconds of setup. Whereas if I have to do something on the mill in the basement, it's like, first you have to make sure everything's aligned right. And you have to make sure you can hold the parts. And you have to know what your stock size is. And, there's just a lot more work on the cam thing. And then you have to make sure the cam paths are reasonable. And, the part's not going to come flying loose while it's still got a spinning bit on it. Just tons more thinking and operator intervention required. The router's more setups, the cam's harder, it's dustier, it's noisier, it has to happen in the basement. If the part is really intricate, if there are internal features and stuff, the router's just blown out of the water by the 3D printer. The 3D printer can kind of print almost arbitrarily interesting geometries. And so, again, here he's making a kind of a flat, bowly, dishy thing, which is easy enough to do on both. But if you were making a bracket that needs to attach things in 3 different directions, that's 3 different setups on the CNC machine, which sucks. And it's one quick print on the 3D printer.
Now, I'm reminded by this of the pandemic. During the pandemic, I, like probably many readers, was involved with my Hackerspace's push to make PPE for, it's actually all the local health centres in Milton Keynes weren't getting any because the hospitals had priority. And one thing that probably all of us worldwide discovered was that a prototyping machine like a 3D printer is a hopeless way to manufacture something. I was printing 5 of those ear savers at a time, and I think they would take more than an hour. And that's a hopeless way to manufacture something. But when it's the only thing you've got, which it was during the pandemic, it's the only way you can do it. So what this tells me is that I use 3D printing far more than I use my Hackerspace's CNC mill because it's just so convenient. It probably, in many cases, isn't the best way to do it, but it's so convenient. The minute I was making more than one, though, if I was making that saucer thing he was making, and I was making, let's say, 16 of them, I would work out a jig such that I could arrange 16 of them in a square and do the one side and then flip them over and then do the other side. We're going back to Mark Brunel in the early 19th century, automating the production of naval pulleys using machine tools. The minute you're making more than one of something, it becomes a lot more worth your while working out all the setup and tooling and stuff to do each one much quicker. So yeah, very interesting piece, but I would have probably 3D printed if I was making one.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you, I reach for the 3D printer most of the time first. But I think he's trying to sell these things. I think this is kind of part of a side hustle. And they're just going to look and feel so much better in wood that I don't think he actually has the choice, right? And
yeah.
At the end of the day, what comes out of a 3D printer is always plastic. Or if it needs to be made out of aluminum, then you really don't have any choice. Again, I stick with my hammers and screwdrivers analogy. I think you need both.
Next up, a project from MIT's Lincoln Labs, 3D printing glass. This is fascinating because they had come up with a means of 3D printing a glass-like substance. It's not quite your sort of window glass, but it's a fused silicate. It uses fairly straightforward ingredients, but more interestingly, the way that it is fused, effectively the way that it is fired, doesn't require a significant furnace or special conditions. It's something that you could conceivably do in your home lab. And what it is it's a suspension of silicates and other inorganic components. They're obviously not letting what the secret sauce is, in sodium silicate solution, which is colloquially known as water glass. And it makes what they describe as an ink, and it's printed not quite FDM style because there's no fusing required. It's just effectively like a pen, but very similar to your 3D printer. And it can print something with this, which dries to a solid. The solid is then not fired, but heated in a 200 degrees C bath of mineral oil, which is actually within reach of most labs. A decent laboratory hot plate should be able to do that. And after a while in that, you take your print out and you wash it with a solvent to get rid of the mineral oil, and you have got a fused silicate device, but effectively a glass 3D print. Now, it's obviously this is a research project at the moment, but for something that's that straightforward to produce, it would not surprise me at all to see this appearing as a commercial product. Now, of course, it'll probably be an expensive commercial product first off, but this isn't made out of platinum. It's made out of relatively accessible materials, so I'd expect it to come down in price. So that's a really interesting thing on the horizon. When I read it first, I saw 3D printing with glass, and I expected it to be some kind of laser sintering or something, and I was very impressed to find that it was quite straightforward.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how I felt about this one. I'm like, oh, that sounds like an awesome research project for some horrible lab. But then the basic secret sauce is, like you said, water glass. And that is pretty cool. I wonder what, other inorganic nanoparticles are, how important that is. But this is a really cool idea. And like you said, totally hacker accessible. I think people should have a look at this. I think we had another post this week that was a person who normally did ceramic prints was taking some of these tricks from that realm and using them in printing plastic, which I thought was a weird upside down world turn of events. But there's some really neat stuff going on these days in modern ceramic 3D printing. So seeing this also in glass it's kind of one step away from that. I'm stoked to see all the funny materials people are printing with.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, I have some water glass in the basement. I could do this.
Well, I know water glass. Growing up on a small farm in the 1970s, you can use it to preserve eggs.
We have a stone wall outside my front yard, and we used it to like seal that up against the weather. And last up from me is a science video from Les, who does a lot of laser projects. This is Homebrew Pockel Cell is Worth the Wait. And the wait in question is, 4 months ago, 6 months ago? Les did a phenomenal video on his crystal growing technique where he has a Arduino controlled, temperature controlled, and concentration controlled bath that let him grow some absolutely fantastic large crystals. What was he going to do with these particular crystals, you might ask? And the answer is make Pockel cells. And so let's talk about the Pockel effect for a sec. In this case, he is growing potassium dihydrogen phosphate crystals, and the crystals are kind of not up-down symmetric, basically. And if you put an electric field on them, because of this asymmetry, the way they polarize light changes. The point is, if you then put another polarizing lens out the other side of it, you can use this high voltage to essentially turn whatever light goes through it on and off. It's like an LCD, basically.
So presumably it's a more efficient light gate than the LCDs. So you can actually buy an LCD shutter. I believe the likes of Adafruit and SparkFun will sell them to you, but their transmissibility is something like 5% of the light gets through. So I'm guessing, is this a lot more efficient?
And able to take a lot higher power. The real trick here is that, you can make these things fairly physically large so they can handle a lot of power in a way that an LCD doesn't. It's using this kind of polarization effect, so I don't know if they get more contrast out of them or not. But they are used for laser switching, where, if you have a continuous laser that you can't turn on and off quickly, this is a way of making a fast shutter for it. The video is mostly about how he took these fantastic raw crystals that he grew in the last one and cuts it. And one of the things he needs here is to cut faces in these crystals super gently and super accurately. And he ends up making a fantastic diamond wire saw here. This is kind of lab equipment that normally would cost like tens of thousands of dollars. And he's making it on the super cheap because you can buy short lengths of diamond wire for like $20 on eBay. Who knew? And so he makes this machine with a couple stepper motors and an Arduino that oscillates the diamond wire up and down, makes a slide that's attached to a vise that then can slide it through the oscillating wire, and he just hangs a weight off of it so it's got a constant force on it, pulling the crystal slowly through. He does discover that you have to clean the diamond wire as it's going through, otherwise it gets clogged up with the crystal dust. And so he's sitting there with a Q-tip and water cleaning this thing off as he goes through the whole time. He suggests you could automate this part, but a single cut takes 20 minutes and he's very patient. And then there's all sorts of polishing and, optical stuff going on after that. But I just love the fact that Les is able to make this work. And one of the things that helps him a lot is an old Scientific American amateur scientist column from, I think, probably the 60s, 50s. He doesn't actually say. But it was a time when these kind of crystals were readily available as war surplus because they were used as a piezo sensor or something. He goes on to it in the video again. Super, super interesting video. But what's really pretty here is that he does get really nice results out of this, and he gets the kind of characteristic, if you look in the video thumbnail, there's this kind of characteristic cross with a big open hole in it that you get out of these cells where the polarization lines up. And that's the kind of on-off. And then he demos it with a laser, and it works.
Yay.
He's got more work to do. To get these things to switch quickly, you need to overcome the capacitance in the crystal, and so you need to make probably a bidirectional high voltage driver, and there's all sorts of fun to be had here. Because he built this awesome crystal growing apparatus, he's got these crystals that would cost him $300 each. And because he's able to put some stepper motors and some diamond wire together and make himself a cutting machine, he saved $10,000 there. And he's got these Pockel cells that if you try to buy them cost kind of $10,000 each as well. And he's got almost lab quality gear coming out of here, and it's all DIY and all very approachable. And that's what I really love about this.
Yeah, that's very cool indeed. I've looked into some of these kind of devices and come away thinking that's way too expensive for what I want. So I'm very impressed to watch he's managed to build his own.
Yeah, laser stuff is really fun, and he's just clearly going through the whole pantheon of cool laser stuff. And right now it's Pockel cell switches. I don't know what it's going to be next, but I'm excited to see what he's up to.
Sharks, perhaps?
Yeah, right.
My final pack today it's called the Lunchbox Computer. It's the Bento, who uses a head-mounted display, like a Specs with some kind of LCD arrangement in it, and found that they were hefting around a laptop and they didn't actually need a display. So they made a Cyberdeck without one. And it's an all-in-one device, but don't think sort of Raspberry Pi 500. This one's a little more slick. It's a very modern keyboard on top, and underneath is the innards of a Steam Deck, space for the battery as well, and space for a container for peripherals. This is very, very tidily packed, hence the using Bento as its name. I'm not a user of a head-mounted display, but I realise a lot of the places I go have a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse and just a USB-C connector now. That's all you need for a desktop. And increasingly, I just plug my little ThinkPad into a USB-C and I'm using a desktop just as though it was a desktop computer. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm realizing I could actually use that computer. Plus, it's very nicely put together. It could almost be a manufactured device. It's definitely if you forgive it the fact that it hasn't got the screen, it's a sort of higher end Cyberdeck, I would say. Obviously, a Steam Deck is not the cheapest device out there. He's talking about using the same idea for other machines. For instance, the framework laptop motherboard, of which are quite a few around, or even single-board computers in the sort of Raspberry Pi kind of class. You'd have to work hard to best the Raspberry Pi 500 there, but certainly make the idea more accessible. I know it's a Cyberdeck, yet another Cyberdeck, and one without a screen, but I featured it here because I think it's a particularly nice one.
What's more cyberpunk than a Cyberdeck without a screen, though? I mean,
well, yes, it's true.
if he figured out a way to jack this into his neural implant in the back of his head, I would be more stoked. But but until then, I'm totally happy to have it project up on his glasses. My first quick hack comes from the Action Lab. This is Static Electricity Remembers. This is a particularly weird science experiment. To cut to the punchline here, he takes a quartz crystal, breaks it in half, so he has two identical pieces, rubs them together. It turns out one of them gets positively and one gets negatively statically charged. You repeat this, and it's basically random which one becomes positively or negatively statically charged in the beginning. And then at some point, if you keep doing the experiment, one of them becomes more often the positive one and one becomes more often the negative one. And they seem to somehow move kind of up and down the triboelectric scale, even though it's the same piece of material. And this is a weird bit of new science that came out, in the last decade, and he's demoing it here. I had no idea. Go check out the video if that is the same for you. Dr. Igor Gaspar, PLA with PETG core filament put to the test. This is the weirdest filament. It really is one filament inside the other. He tests it for all sorts of mechanical and physical purposes and finds out it's kind of exactly halfway in between the benefits of PLA and PETG. Not better than both of them, but just kind of halfway. Why would you do this? I have no idea. But he goes through a great testing suite and has nice summary of the results. I had never seen this guy's YouTube channel before. apparently is kind of a big deal, and I just didn't know it. But it's a nice channel to follow if you haven't seen his stuff before. At Kilar Pong in discrete components. This is kind of retro. Pong, of course, before they made the Pong chips, was made in discrete components, and Atkilar found a low-res circuit diagram and kind of transcribed it into modern, making it up in KiCad, and then builds one of these super old-school Pong devices. What's cool about the video, though, is that he goes through all of the different subsystems in the logic and explains how it works. So if you can't imagine how you could build a only moderately sophisticated video game out of raw ICs, this is a cool watch. And last up, Daniel from the Modbot channel. Is Box Turtle the open source AMS we've been waiting for? An AMS is an automatic filament switcher and lets you do multi-filament prints fairly easily. Box Turtle is an open source project that has been getting a lot of traction in the last year. This is a review of his Box Turtle build, where its strengths and weaknesses lie, and some help if you want to go down that road yourself. Just to be clear, this is kind of a standalone box with a bunch of filament spools in it. It takes care of the pulling them in and out of the hot end on your printer. You do need to make a couple modifications there, but it's not anything that the motivated 3D printerer couldn't do.
My first one comes from Simon Boak, and it's a paper tape punch machine. And I was attracted to it in particular just because it looks so beautiful. It looks as though it's walked straight out of a 1960s machine room, in that it looks like a manufactured product. Inside it, as you might expect, a series of solenoids. It's not something earth-shattering if you've ever sort of seen a punch tape reader before, but I just liked it because of its sheer professional look. Next up, Fellets has produced it's an ornament, it's a paperweight, but what he's done is he has taken a watch apart. I do hope it was a watch that didn't work, because it would be a shame to waste an early 20th century watch. But he's taken this watch apart and has mounted it and set it in resin as an exploded watch. And the interesting thing there was, how do you get something to float in the middle of resin? And he had to find some fishing line, which had, I presume, the same refractive index as resin, so it didn't show. But the end result is quite impressive. It's all the parts of a watch is like a 3D exploded diagram, only it's there in front of you in acrylic. I rather liked it. Simon has an e-paper photo frame, a colour e-paper photo frame, which is quite a score, and has turned it into a weather map. Now, photo frames are great, but really all they can do is display photos. And once you got bored with that, what do you do? And he's effectively creating a photo every time for the photo frame to display on the fly, which has the weather map. I think it's a really nice use of a photo frame, and particularly because it's a colour e-ink photo frame, it's really a nice thing to have. Finally, this is a piece on another publication, but when I read it, I thought, I've learned something from this. Petapixel did a guide to photographic lenses, basically what the factors behind their design is and what the different types of lenses do and what the different types of lens systems do. I spent a lot of time in my life hacking cameras, and I learned quite a lot about lenses from this, and I'm no slouch when it comes to lenses. So I think if you have any interest in any kind of photographic project, you should go away and read this on Petapixel.
All right, well, that brings us to our Can't Miss articles. These are long-form pieces written by our fantastic Hackaday writing staff. This week, I wanted to pick Dan Maloney's latest installment in his mining and refining series. This week, drilling and blasting. Up to now in mining and refining, he's actually been doing kind of all of the stuff that comes later. That is the chemistry and production processes and engineering that helps you get the ore out of the mess of rock. This is, of course, the one he maybe even should have started with. This is how you get that mess of rock in the first place. And the answer these days is drilling deep holes, filling them with explosives, and blowing them up. Because it's just so much more effective than working at it with a shovel and a pick, right? The dynamite stick. I learned a heck of a lot from this because I'm not a blasting engineer, and it was really neat. Over and above that, the writing in this piece is absolutely fantastic. This is like one of Dan's masterpieces as far as I'm concerned. It starts off, it's an inconvenient fact that most of Earth's largesse of useful minerals is locked up in, under, or around a lot of rock. Our little world condensed out of the remnants of stars whose death throes cooked up almost every element in the periodic table. And in the intervening billion years, those elements have sorted themselves out into deposits that range from the easily accessed, lying about on the top of the ground types to those buried deep in the crust, or worse yet, those that are distributed so sparsely within a mineral matrix that it takes harvesting megatons of material just to find a few kilos of the stuff. And it goes on and it goes on, and it's absolutely fantastic. If you're not in the mood for a literary piece, this one also covers the kind of physical basis. And one thing that I learned from this is that, you know how they do those drill holes and then they fill them with explosive? I had always, because I don't know anything, assumed that they filled them with dynamite or something. But no, he claims that most of the time they use ANFO, which is ammonium nitrate and fuel oil.
Gosh.
Yeah, exactly. So they just fill it up with something ready to go. And they do this because it's basically safe to handle. It's kind of no worse than gasoline in a sense. You don't want to be lighting your cigarette around it, but it won't blow up if you look at it wrong or if you hit it or whatever. It needs a booster to detonate. And then so you have to have something like TNT, something like nitroglycerin, that's also fairly stable. And in fact, it's so stable that to fire that stuff off, you need a blasting cap. And so, there's this like multi-step routine that they do both because of price, but also because things get safer and safer as they get used in larger and larger quantities. So, you come in with a fuel truck full of ANFO and you just pour it into these holes, right? But then when it comes down to the little blasting caps, they're these tiny little things that are on the end of, carefully timed blasting wires. Learned a lot about that. He's got a fantastic 1950s explosives safety video, which is retro-tectacular hilarious. Apparently, back in the day, blasting companies weren't as careful as they are now, and they lost blasting caps all over the place or something. Gosh. Because it used to be common to tell school kids that if they saw blasting caps, they should call the police in a kind of weird dystopian duck and cover 1960s kind of way, right? You find blasting caps lying around. And then, of course, there's links into the world of YouTube blasting videos where they just have video after video after video of people blowing stuff up. But it's really neat because, of course, these are all extremely precisely orchestrated and timed. You blow something up here and then you fire the next one because you've just liberated some space that you can blow the stuff into from the next one, right? It's not just, okay, we time it to all go off at the same time. It's actually carefully orchestrated, and you have to know how much material you're moving, how fast it's going to be going, so you can know when to fire the next one, because then you have that much space clear. And so it's a really neat process, and cool videos of these like crazy multi-row hyper sequenced blasting demos. And that's pretty cool too. I don't know. I just walked away from this with a bigger appreciation for how this part of kind of civil engineering or whatever it is, pyrotechnics, actually works. That alone is probably worth it. So give it a read, but it's at the same time, it's a literary masterpiece about blowing stuff up.
Oh, that's wonderful.
and Joe made some great art for it. It's got a super art at the top. This one's going on my list.
Very much so. Yeah, my can't miss this week comes from my colleague Al Williams. It's a eulogy for the satellite phone. If you're around in the 1990s, we were just moving from 2G mobile phones, first GPRS kind of digital mobile phones, into sort of 3G, and 4G hadn't been invented yet, much less 5G. And there was a lot of hype around, particularly in the middle of that decade, about satellite phones. Iridium was coming along, and there were several other consortia going to be sending up lots and lots of satellites, and sort of ground-based mobile phones were going to be irrelevant and outdated. And it didn't actually happen that way. Motorola, who were behind Iridium, basically nearly went bust because of it. I believe, did Iridium end up owned by the US government for government stuff in the end? And of course, we ended up with much more ubiquitous ground-based mobile phones. And what Al's done is he's gone through the history of satellite phones from sort of very early fixed satellite terminal type phones through to the likes of Iridium and gone into why it didn't really work. I think the idea was originally that you would be able to use one of these phones anywhere on the Earth's surface, like places where there definitely wouldn't be any mobile phones. And what actually happened was all the sort of remote countries in the world, places in Africa or Central Asia or wherever, got their mobile phone infrastructure in later than everywhere else. So oddly, if you go to parts of Africa, you will find, or parts of Africa that haven't got huge amounts of population, you'll find that they have better mobile phone coverage than, say, Oxfordshire, where I come from, because they simply got their mobile phone coverage much later. The need for the likes of Iridium sort of evaporated. And it's a sort of fascinating tale of what might have been. And there's some lovely pictures of big, chunky 90s phones with very large Iridium antennas sort of folded out from them. I think what would have really killed it would have been not so much the fact that whether it worked or not, but that the data rates available with them weren't that high. Nowadays, probably most of us don't actually use our phone as a phone that much. It's primarily a handheld computer and data terminal, and doing that on 90 spec satellite phone bandwidth, I think, will become very tedious very quickly. It's certainly a fascinating piece, and I'd advise anybody to give it a read.
Yeah, Al's been wanting to write this piece for a while now, and what our listeners may not know about Al Williams is that he used to previously work in the oil pipeline industry and ended up in some pretty weird and remote places, and has personal experience with satellite phones like you wouldn't believe, because back in the day, that used to be the only way to get service, and, you know, certainly high reliability service in some remote parts of the world where the oil industry operates. And so that's partly why he's into this whole thing. But we had one even when I was a kid for, you know, use when we were super deep country backpacking. And this was, again, before cell phones were so well spread out. And I remember it cost like so much per minute, and we actually tested the thing a couple times just to make sure it would work before we headed out. And, you know, it was so fidgety to get the antenna right, and you had to point it, and it had a gauge on it, and you could point this antenna at where it thought the satellites were. No fun whatsoever. So I think it's awesome that Al wrote this up as a eulogy to a dying tech, but man, I'll tell you why it's dying. But the satellites are still up there, and you pointed out to Iridium, which I guess is now mostly kind of military customers. And this is a collection of roughly 70 satellites that are all in known orbits. They are doing mostly text messages these days, and because they're satellites, it means everybody can listen to them. And there's a bunch of hackers working on Iridium stuff. So if you want to follow that, actually mostly it's Sek and Schneider here out of Chaos Munich. I'll throw some links in. You can watch their talks. They've actually managed to interest some other people into poking around in Iridium as well. And it's really interesting because, you know, as kind of the last satellite pager network standing, it gets used by a lot of weird services. And there may be some interesting stuff to listen into out there if you're interested into listening to weird stuff. It's also a tech challenge, and I think that's the other half of the fun. So I'll point you to some talks you can watch if you want to get up to speed on the hacker side of this.
I remember about 20 years ago, long before the likes of Starlink, standing on a hill near Oxford at dusk because there was an Iridium flare, which was when the sun would catch the relatively low orbit for the time satellites, and you get this sort of flash. One of those things that it was exciting at the time, a bit like the first time you saw the International Space Station in a sort of similar era. It was a more innocent time for space enthusiasts.
Well, that wraps it up for this week's Hackaday podcast. Thanks very much for listening. If you want to follow along the links, head over to hackaday.com/podcast. And if you see anything that you'd like us to write up, send us a tip. tips@hackaday.com. And until next week,
eat, sleep, hack, repeat. Do not put that one in the outtakes. So I'm just adjusting my headphones.
Yoicks.
It's a bit niche.
Hackaday writers never fall asleep. No part of them. They're all awake all the time.
Awkward silence.
Or no, it's vice versa. Actually, crap.
No, let me start this one again.
See, there's a man.
There'll be a flame fest in the comments.
Oh, I hope so.